Hey, everybody. It is the second half of the World War II and the Home Fronts presentation that we started, that I recorded last week and that you're doing everything this week. So previously we did all this stuff. Look how fast it goes. I mean, that's just amazing. Oh, war bonds. I mean, who knew? Wow. All right. So anyhow, we're here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the second half of this today and give you an idea of what's going on. Just in case you're wondering, it's Monday. It's raining outside, and I guess today during lunch the courtyard will be closed, so we'll open up the gym and you guys can go eat in there or something. Anyhow, in all seriousness, going on in the home fronts during World War One, a variety of places. That included Britain, where they had a rule they called Dora. And, okay, everybody sing along to the Dora theme song for just a moment. Dora, find your backpack. You didn't actually sing along, did you? Anyhow, Dora allowed... Chick-fil-A sending me things saying, come eat. Anyhow, Dora is, something that allowed the government to do a number of things that infringe potentially on people's rights. Now, granted, we have a Bill of Rights in the United States, and formally Britain does not. But for the purpose of the war years, to make sure that there were no disruptions that were going on, as you can see in the text there, it talks about the fact the government could take away a person's land, or it could censor newspapers at will for infringing on what we would consider freedom of speech or freedom of the press. They also could arrest troublemakers, and notice how that's in quotation marks. I mean, again, that could mean just about anybody. Somebody who's like, I really don't like the way the war is going, or somebody else has said, I hate our country. Well, then they're troublemakers, and they can be arrested. The government also got the ability to buy different products it needed at potentially really, really cheap prices, so that potentially a company couldn't make a lot of money on it, or potentially even take a loss. But the government would say, we need it for our needs, as a nation, and too bad. Again, on the line of what was going on previously, where I said the government banned buying drinks for others, or too many drinks you could have when you went to a pub while you were at work or something. Pubs in the afternoons, as people were going home, people are spending too much time in the pubs, and they're failing to report back to work on time. And as a result of that, there's less production going on. It's also the first time you see daylight savings time. Psychological studies have shown that people are more productive during daylight hours. So they wanted to make sure they could take advantage of, what sunlight there was, and potentially make the British population, I guess, more supportive of the war effort. In the United States, and you saw something this last week with the videos you saw, we passed something called the Espionage Act, and that was already a stretch. It's going to be made worse by the Sedition Act. But the Espionage Act, anybody who interferes with the draft, what does that mean? Does that mean you're going to be like, no, you can't go in and register, or, who knows what? You can interpret that in a lot of different ways. But anybody who encourages disloyalty, again, what does that mean? So, that could put you up into prison for 20 years. War's going to be over literally a year and a half later, and you're still in prison for 18 and a half more years. How about that? The Sedition Act in 1918 makes it even worse. Anybody who interferes with war bond sales, disrupts recruiting, says something disloyal or abusive about the government. Wait a second. I mean, we are allowed in the United States to have freedom of speech, and we're saying lots of things about our government right now. Oh, I wish this was better, or I wish the governor had done that, or I wish the president had done that, or whatever. You get you arrested. Now, does this violate freedom of speech? Heck yeah, it does. But, sorry, Mountain Dew break. All right, never mind. It's over. Say something abusive about the Constitution. How are you going to say something abusive about the Constitution? Oh, I wish it had been made in 1786. The flag. Oh, I wish our flag was red, white, and green. Or the uniform. I don't know. I'm just being a little silly right now. I just got done watching John Krasinski. But realistically speaking, again, those are pretty, far out there things as far as what people aren't allowed to do. And as you can see, 1,500 people ended up getting arrested by the end of the war. And again, we're only in it for about a year. But 1,500 people get arrested, including a perennial socialist candidate for president, Eugene V. Debs. And you saw him in that video last week, which you're supposed to be watching for this week, but I goofed. And he would actually run for president from his jail cell. So people took this to an extreme. State laws were passed prohibiting the teaching of German, the language, in schools and colleges. And for you guys, it doesn't matter much since we are so myopic. We only offer French and Spanish. But when I was in high school, in both St. Pete High School as well as Forest Hill, we definitely had a German program. So ich habe Deutsch gelernt, and I took it in college, and I was able to get by. We visited Germany with students in the past, but unfortunately, we're really beginning to limit what kind of languages we offer. Even Chinese, we tried once at Suncoast, and then we got rid of it after 1 year. Not allowed to play music that were written by German composers, Bach, Beethoven, all those kind of guys. Why? Because they've been dead for 200 years, and playing that music supports Germany? That makes no sense whatsoever. Just as stupid as in the first, iteration of the Gulf War, we, said, oh, France wouldn't let us do something. We're not going to call French fries French fries. We're going to call them freedom fries. Yeah, really? That's going to teach the French. They didn't even invent them. So there's that video you're supposed to see. We'll just skip that. German and Austrians banned from public employment in Canada. Again, now, I don't have full information on this. Maybe it was they were still nationals of those places, and then they would have access potentially to sensitive government information. All right, I get that. But if you were German and you moved to Canada and you were a naturalized citizen and you demonstrated your loyalty to Canada all this time, you even started saying "a," then why are they discriminating against you just simply because of hysteria, craziness, and fear? Also in Canada, German language not allowed to be taught, which is awkward. When you live in a place called Berlin, Canada. So again, they changed the name to Kitchener, which it still is today. Now, one thing that was pretty serious was that miners that were going underground to mine coal or other things, that's a pretty dangerous job already. But the fear was because coal was needed for producing electricity and for producing, could power ships in some cases and whatnot. The fear was that, somebody who's of German descent might still have loyalty to the old country, show up in the mine, and while everybody's down underground, essentially blow it up so the whole thing collapses and caves in, and a lot of people would be, either killed or put at severe risk. So miners were very concerned that this was going to be going on, and as a result, they refused to go down into the mines until people who were German or Austrian were essentially, pulled out and not allowed to go down to the mines. They didn't want their safety at risk. So over the course of the war, some 7,000 people. And this is kind of like a precursor to what you're going to see next year with the Japanese Canadians in World War II. During World War I, Canada went to an extreme that we didn't do. 7,000 people who were of German or Austrian descent were basically pulled aside, and they were interns, sort of like, and I'm going to be very careful about this. A lot of people get concentration camps confused with extermination camps that the Nazis ran. Several different societies have had concentration camps at times, political opposition going there, or people they want to politically re-educate. And that's what a concentration camp originally started with. In fact, they're used in the Spanish-American, or prior to the Spanish-American War in 1898 by the Spanish, for people down in Cuba who are not completely supportive of, Spanish colonial laws. And that's one of the things that gets us into it. But in this case, they kind of take these 7,000 Canadians during World War I, and they send them out to some pretty remote places and make them work against their will. And I thought that was the next thing. I guess we're going to come back to that in a moment. Another thing, to show how crazy people got about the anti-Germanism, it used to be that the British royal family's last name was Saxe-Coburg Gotha. And they said, no, I don't think that sounds very British. It's because it's not. George III, the last, king of the United States or of America, was actually German by birth, and they brought him over to be the king after the death of the last one. So by the time you get to 1914, they're like, dude, let's not use that as our last name anymore. We want people to get the idea we're German. So they changed their last name to Windsor, which technically it is today. In case you didn't know, that's a trivia question. You could potentially use the House of Windsor. So there you go. Oops, wrong way. So some rationing and other things. The kitchen is the key to victory. Eat less bread. Again, sharing your conserving resources. Remember, we must feed Daddy too because he's off on the front. That looks pretty, sparse there. We're gonna eat out of one plate because apparently we also have to send Daddy our extra plates too. An American example. What the heck? So this is an American example in both cases: preserve perishable produce. The idea being, like, when you're let's say you've got some fruit growing in your backyard, you want to make sure that it's not going to spoil. You don't want to throw stuff away. You might want to save it throughout the year. So as a result, you find a way to can it, to preserve it, store it on the shelf for a later point, and then you'll be able to use that when you need some additional vitamin C in the winter months, or something like that. And then, of course, targeted at people who are recent immigrants. Food will win the war. You came here seeking freedom. You must now help preserve it. Wheat is needed for the Allies. Weighs nothing. A lot of people were very patriotic and wanted to show, their new country their loyalty. And so this was one way it could be done. And you see over here, Pershing's Crusaders. That's kind of a thing we wouldn't do now, because it's associated with the anti-Muslim crusades, of course, of the Middle Ages. But trying to get this idea, we're going back to restore order in some place where it's going on. And there's Pershing essentially hearkening back to those days of the Crusades. This German example over on the side, you wouldn't get this unless I told you, but this character right here is a character by the name of Germania. It's this figurative character that's used in Germany in both World War I, World War II. The personification of Germany, like we have Columbia or Uncle Sam. You don't see it now because it's associated with World War I and World War II. But, this is Germania. Again, it's kind of like really old school Middle Ages, the Teutonic era, when they stood up to the Romans, and it was an area the Romans couldn't conquer, was Germany. Over here, this is Kaiser Wilhelm II over here with his special Pickelhaube, with his eagle up on top, and this soldier, the blonde-haired guy, looking up going, I'm so happy to be sacrificing for you guys. Way to go. Okay, Dr. Bussey, you can stop now. So let's stop for a second and talk about something that I think is particularly poignant. And that's as far as the home fronts being affected, they were dramatically. And in the case of the British are fantastic when it comes to commemorating those lost in World War I and World War II. For them, it's not just, some war that took place 100 years ago, and there's like this generic monument down in like the center of the city that people ignore, don't pay any attention to, stop, or whatever else. But if you were to go to London and go to the Waterloo train station, there are these 4 large panels as you're coming in one particular entrance to take a train over into Europe, or even catch an underground tube stop. But, if you look at this one, it starts over here with the A's and it ends with the D's. And these are the names of the company's employees who gave their lives in the Great War. And for that, I have to assume we're talking about perhaps the London Underground. I mean, obviously, millions of people were called up by the British in World War I, and their losses were highly significant. And you can look on there and you can see, for instance, 1, 2, 3, 4 people by the name of Cook with no E. There's one with an E. And they could be, relatives in some cases. Several Browns that are there, several Bennetts that are there, several Davises there. And, the possibility is they're fairly common names. But if you look at that one, sorry, that's the next one. It goes to K and it's blurry. And I have a better picture, but I forgot to put it in. Here's another one. You see 3 Knights, you see 3 Knots, you see a couple of Lawrences, another name, the Olivers. There's 4 of them that are there. The thing that makes this so pause worthy for me when I go and I see this is that these are individuals who were all lost. And again, you look at these 4 tablets, there's a whole lot of people who are listed there. They choose not to remember them as a group. They choose to actually remember them as individuals. And, that individual who never got a chance to come home and, raise a family, never got a chance to have a full career, maybe the person who would have cured cancer or something else. A person gave their life so that, essentially we would have the freedoms that we do today. And these individuals, by having us stop at least and look over there and go, F.R. Morin, might not know who that guy is. You might not know where he was from. But for a moment, his name is not forgotten. And it would be a place where family members could come back in years later and have a moment to remember that lost loved one, or have other people remember the sacrifice that was borne by families because their relative never came home. And again, here's the 4th one. It's awkward to get this one because it's on some stairs and you can't stand uneasily and hold up a camera or something. But see, like a couple Saunders that are there, a couple of Selbys, lots of Smiths. Short is not exactly a normal last name, so having three of those, that's kind of, probably going to be people who are relatives there. But this is just one company and what it lost. In this case, you could barely see it in a binding remembrance of the 2,236 men of the Northeastern Railway who gave their lives to their country in the Great War. The company places this monument, 1914, 1919. And this is a totally different thing. I found this at another place. Can't even remember where it is off the top of my head. It's not Waterloo train station. It is not that same list of people you saw before. But again, this one railway lost 2,200 of its people who at one time or another worked for them and never came home from World War I. So imagine what that does to a community. And it should be also noted that the Cambridge and Oxford universities are both very different than what we're used to in the United States. In, let's say, Florida State, there's a college for engineering. There's a college of social sciences. There's a college of mathematics. Okay, and they're all underneath the university. Well, in Oxford and Cambridge, they actually have individual colleges that make up the university. And in these colleges, you can be a student of medicine or of engineering or of education or other things, but you belong to that house. It's very much like in Harry Potter, where you're either a Gryffindor, a Slytherin, or a Hufflepuff, or a Ravenclaw. But realistically speaking, this one particular college, I mean, these people, again, they have like a big dorm they live in. They have their own chapel. They have, their own professors that come and do things with them. And it's all tied into Oxford. This particular college, all of these names on here, and again, it might be kind of hard to see what's going on. Apologize. It's, lighting on partially, but all of these names represent individuals associated with this college who went off to war and never came home. And one thing that I felt a little bit bad about when I was in Oxford and studying there was that they would have a list of all the students and graduates and potentially the professors who were going off and fighting and not coming home. But if you were an individual who was one of their workers, one of the servants, you still got listed on the side. You're associated with the house or with the university, the college. But even in death, your station is here and they are up here. And, they all gave their lives equally. They shared the same, foxholes and same risks. And yet, even in death, they're remembered as a slightly lesser person than just being mixed in there. And that's unfortunate. You see this at Oxford. This is St. John's College in Cambridge. I couldn't fit it all in one picture. So I had to sort of try and splice it together. But again, column of names here from St. John's, another column, another column, another column. And again, all individuals who are lost so that they would not be forgotten. So I'm going to tell you a brief little quick story. When I was a freshman and sophomore in high school, my dad was in the Air Force, and his last assignment was to a base in England. And we lived in one little town in a place called Hilton, not terribly far from Cambridge. And we lived there for 1 year. And then the second year, we bought a house in a place called Buckton. So just to put it out there, red brick area right there, when Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, and he's like, I don't really want to be around you anymore. I want somebody hotter. He didn't divorce his wife. He didn't kill her. He basically sent her somewhere else. And then he divorced her, and that sort of caused the break with Rome. And she was housed in a palace, a small palace that's back here, that red brick building behind this church. First time we went to this church when we lived in England, the door that's hanging on this particular church has been hanging there, the same door, since before Columbus reached America. It's old. And so this town is not huge. It was mostly a residential place, and people went elsewhere for work and came back at night. And it was a great place, quiet place, fascinating place to be. I really loved living there. But here you can see their combined monument to World War I and World War II. And you can see, in honor of those who fell. And I'm trying to see down here. So this one and this one were added second. This is a very traditional Celtic cross that you would see in many places in England. You see red poppies that are associated with World War I, like I had going in my room, or you might have seen in other things. But these are the names of all the people from this one particular town. Population maybe 5,000 at most, even when I lived there. And so it did a pretty good job of, culling the community of people who were going to be part of its future. Even more so, in that first place we lived, a place called Hilton, and this church was built by a knight. He was given the choice: you can go be in the Crusades, or you can build a church to show your piety. He said, "I'd rather build a church. I don't want to go die." So this little tiny church, coldest church I've ever gone to services in, is for a very small farming town in a place called Hilton. And we're talking, at the time that the First World War happens, probably no more than 300 people live in the town at total. Yet you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11 young men from that community never came home from World War One. And you could pretty much assume life in that community had always been the same. Young men, took over their dad's farms, married the local girls, they had the next generation, and life continued as normal. But for this little town, what that meant was they lost 11 guys, and that social structure in the town was definitely, dealt a severe blow, and probably definitely changed the trajectory of this particular small town in a very large way. And they were expected to marry the local girls, and now there's more local girls not getting married. And what does that mean? Farms that are not going to stay in certain families' hands and things like that. But just as before, their names are individually up here, and assuming their descendants still live in the town, or their relatives do, they can at least see that walking in a church on a Sunday. In Germany, here's an example of a World War One monument. There's not a lot of those. They lost the war, so because they lost the war, they don't have as many memorials. It's just not something they do. The United States National Monument to World War One is actually in Kansas City, Kansas. This one here, this World War One, they wouldn't have called it World War One. Pardon me, just a moment. Macy, I'm doing a class online right now. I need you to be quiet. This is in Washington, D.C. It is not the National World War One Monument. Like I said, that's in Kansas City. This is the Washington, D.C. Monument. They made their own. It's actually up on the mall. If you were to walk from the World War II monument up towards the Lincoln Memorial, it's on the left-hand side, and it's just been cleaned up in recent years. Didn't used to look all this white. The names of all the residents of D.C. who fell are inscribed around the base down here. They're sprucing it up, and there is actually a World War One monument going into Washington, D.C. now. Why they did Kansas City, I honestly can't tell you. I just know there's a huge museum there, and it's really worth going to. I've never been, but that's where they put it. And this is an example of one in Hungary. You can see this is an example of a Hungarian soldier and some names from this particular community that were lost, and flowers still being placed there. But the Russian example I never got, so that's too bad. Anyhow, so that's the story as far as the remainder of this presentation is concerned. It's the war impacted a lot of people in a lot of different ways, from people not coming home to people coming home with shell shock to people who were, dealing with a number of things. And it's really unfortunate that that happened, but that was how World War One impacted countries around the world.